Jay has a question about a link for connecting a mobile application to RAD server and then getting data on local devices and storing it, querying it, analyzing it. So I'm going to give you a link, Jay, here to the Glowacki. Has a tutorial on implementing your first EMS client application, which EMS is the server used inside RAD server. Part of it, I don't want to say it's renamed, but it's kind of evolution. So we use those terms interchangeably, which may make it a little interesting for looking at documentation, but know that they work together.
And those links all in the blog post as well. The building an EMS package tutorial as well as the mobile tutorials. I think also in his sort of text, he talks about what about local storage, and we have many videos about using, for example, IB Lite or using local storage files or using an INI file or a text file or SQLite and other things if you want to persist data mobile on the mobile device or desktop device for that matter, and then synchronize it back to via RAD server back to the backend database by calling apply updates, FireDAC handles caching, and we've got lots of tutorials about how to work in a connected, disconnected world of mobile and desktop talking through multi-tier, either through DataSnap or RAD server to the backend.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you a link here for the local SQL skill sprint that'll walk you through using local SQL against that FDMIM table.
Yep.
There's tons and tons of stuff out there as far as, like David was saying, persisting it, doing the changes and stuff like that. But the local SQL stuff is really cool, so definitely check that out.
And DataSnap still is available if you want to build everything yourself using DataSnap multi-tier technology. You can do that. I think the difference in DataSnap, we give you all the pieces and parts in the framework. In RAD server, everything is built for you. User management, other than populating your user information, push notifications, local storage, beacon fence, all of the things that you would see, analytics, all of that is pre-built for you, and you just get the benefit of all of that. Just create your packages, put them in, you get the analytics being captured, and all of that is turnkey. So that's the subtle difference. DataSnap's still there, and it can do REST JSON as well. So it's in a sense your choice. And wherever you see EMS in the Glowacki, think RAD server. Right? RAD server leverages, as Michael mentioned at the beginning, the EMS technology, the frameworks that we use under the covers, the JSON, and so on. And as you saw in Jim's presentation, you can run it locally in ISAPI DLL, and as you saw in Pawel's presentation, you can also create and deploy to Amazon, or for that matter Azure or Rackspace or Docker or any other cloud-based system, as long as you have a Windows instance, so that we can run IIS. And then eventually, when we have the Linux compiler and Linux server support, you'll be able to deploy your applications to a Linux target, your server side to a Linux target as well. Okay. Some of the suggestions that have popped in, I will pass along to product management and to marketing and sales. I think Gerard, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, he was asking, can he create multiple different clients that talk to RAD server? Really, applications, yes, reservation, legislation, audit, and so on. Absolutely, and you saw some of that. You saw us building different endpoints, and you can put all of those endpoint packages into a RAD server container. You saw that in the samples. And in the pricing, it's unlimited number of endpoints. You just keep adding, either add interfaces to an existing package, or add more packages. Better from a microservices standpoint would be to create packages based on functionality that hangs together. So you could have a RAD server EMS package for reservation processing, for legislation processing, for auditing, for payments, for other kinds of things, and then have your client application, whether it's a desktop or mobile, application call the endpoints that it needs to do its work? So the answer absolutely is yes, and it's really for you to break up or package the different functionality in one or more BPLs. Marco did a few endpoints in his package, and Al did a few endpoints in his package that were based on different parts of the application, querying based on a type of or a department code, and Marco based on what was happening in the store, for example. So you can absolutely decide how to split up or combine your packages. There's no limit in RAD Server in the pricing based on number of endpoints or number of package files. That's unlimited. It's how you want to architect your application. Me, I favor putting like functionality in a common EMS package file, but you could put everything in one. So leave it to you to decide how you want to quote unquote package up the reusable functionality. And all of this code is a work in progress, and I put a comment in the blog post for this webinar. We're still working on feature work for this demo, but we used parts of it in the RAD server launch a month ago, and we've added some more functionality today. So now is the time we'll package up all the demos and the data model and everything else into a zip file, and that link will be added to the blog post for this webinar. Again, the short URL is embt.co/RAD server deep dive. First letter of each of those parts, uppercase, uppercase R, uppercase S, uppercase D, uppercase D. And that is, again, in the chat window. And then bookmark the source code project on Code Central, because we'll be adding functionality. And I'll put a README file in the zip file for the source code that tells you some of the features we're still doing, because these applications are works in progress. There's a list of additional things that we'd like to hook in as well. And then Jim's going to put into the blog post for the webinar the link to the GitHub for the Angular sample that talks to a notes database. But we want to take Angular and have a client, for example, that would use maybe a back office, use a web interface, for example, to edit pricing of products. That would be a great sample that says, you could do that, of course, on a desktop or a mobile app in Delphi or C++ Builder, but what you may have a different part of the team that is that does Java development, or another team that does web-based development. So why not be able to use those same backends to get the data, but have different clients? So that's what we try to show, showing you Delphi, C++, Java, and JavaScript, Angular, JS clients. That's the beauty of having a pure solution in RAD Server backend that is REST and JSON based.
And there's a question here about using Electron as another client to consume it. If you can consume a REST service, which a lot of tools out there can, then it can be used to build a client application. It's very simple, very straightforward, very much a standard REST server, so should be very easy to build clients in whatever tool or framework you want to use. There's a question here about, can RAD server run on one web server, or can multiple RAD servers run on one web server, each talking to different databases? So the RAD server is going to be running on a let's see, I guess you could do that. You could have it at different virtual directories. So in my partnership, you had to install RAD server, the EMS server, into a virtual directory. So it would be on one port 80, because the web server would be on port 80, but then you could have multiple virtual directories, each virtual directory with a different RAD server instance in it. Another option you could do is you could have one RAD server EMS instance, and then that instance could have multiple packages in it, and each package could be talking to a different database, because each package has the database connections within it. So you could do that, and I would guess in theory you could have one package that was talking to multiple databases as well. So really lots of ways to slice that up. and I guess you could then replicate that across multiple servers for redundancy's sake. So yeah, like I said, lots of ways to slice that up, just depending on what the best solution you want to have for your scenario. How would that affect licensing? I think it's per RAD server license, if I remember right. Correct. Yeah, so that would be a per. Well, it depends on which licensing you use, I guess, actually. So if you're using the server license, then that would be multiple servers because each server is doing something different, if I understand correctly. If you're using the per device license, then if you still only have 3 devices, then that's fixed. So it really depends on, if you've only got a few clients that are going to be connecting, then go with that license and you can have 100 servers. But if you're going to have thousands of clients, then go with the server licensing.
Yes, so the license and the cost is based on the user database. So not the user database that we had, for example, the customer backend database, but the RAD server user database. So in a sense, it's per user database. So if you have lots of RAD servers all configured to use the same user database, where you buy either unlimited license or per device, that's the key. But again, if you're unsure for a scenario you have, contact our sales office, our resellers. But I think Michael said it very clear, and I'll put some notes in the blog post again. It's the license that you pay for to get that user database. And you could have multiple RAD servers running on multiple machines. If their INI file is pointing to the same user database for managing users, then that's where the license comes in. And that's separate from talking to back-end databases that are part of your application, right?
Okay, that I didn't quite get that. That makes sense.
That's the way to think about it is how many user databases with user access control and permissions and device registration, all of that kinds of stuff. How many of those do you have? Either you have one or multiple, or you decide again per device, and then you don't care. You could have multiple user databases, multiple servers, and you're going to be restricted only by how many devices can connect. So you could start thinking about, well, gee, what if I created a server, for example, that was my connection? So there's all sorts of ways you could architect the system to do what you need. And the best thing, again, is contact our sales office. They'll connect you to technical sales engineers that we have in the field to talk about some of these kind of architectural and implementation deployment solutions or situations, and they can build up a quote for you. I wish I could have a spreadsheet where you just fill in the columns, and maybe somebody will write an app that does that. Okay, I think that was most of the questions. Again, the questions about what different solutions you might want to use, as Jim mentioned, as long as you have a solution or framework or a package you want to use that can deal with JSON and REST-based calls, you could implement a client in Python or as you Ruby, any other language that you might think about, C# and so on, and we'll work on some additional client demos that talk to RAD Server over time. This is our last webinar for this month of June, but we're doing the process now to come up with additional topic-based webinars for the coming months throughout the rest of this year. So if you have suggestions, you can send emails to any or all of us for topics you'd love to have us cover. In the Northern Hemisphere, it's also summertime, so we're aware that some people will be on vacations here and there, but if you miss, we're still going to move ahead with the webinar series, and you'll just catch the replay on the Embarcadero YouTube channel when it's available. Again, you'll get an email from GoToWebinar, which has all the links as reminders, I've been pretty good about getting the webinar replays up, both as a complete video as well as the individual parts within a couple days after the webinar. For the mobile one, I had it up on Friday, and all of those are available on the Embarcadero TechNet YouTube channel. So you'll get an email as a thank you with all the links that you need. And if there's anything else you need, send us emails. We love them. Okay, any last words, Jim, Marco, or Pawel?
I was just thinking, if there is a specific technology that you think is different that you'd like to see us use to build a client application, let us know. We can take a look at it and see. Like I said, if it has a tutorial available that says, hey, this is how you connect to a REST service, just use that and connect to notes, and bam, look at that, you've built a client application. But if there's something you'd really like to see a feature one, let us know, and maybe we can incorporate that, assuming we can figure out how to do it.
Okay, there were a few questions here and there about authentication. So out of the box, RAD Server does authentication against the user database. So when you add users, the wizard adds a standard user test and then test pass, and you can add other users using the console. And so it'll validate against the user database, which is the EMS database that is running a version of Interbase to go, or Interbase under the covers for keeping track of users' devices and so on. And then there's a hook if you want to do other forms of authentication. You can do attribute-based authentication. You can also get a hook to go out to whatever your authentication system is, whether it's LDAP or something else. So while we don't have a LDAP component you drop down, there's a way for you to make those calls to whatever your system is out there. And there are, other solutions and libraries that you can use, including Windows API calls for getting out to Active Directory, LDAP, and other kinds of things. Our demos included with 10.1 Berlin. There are demos for RAD Server EMS. Look under the samples, Object Pascal, look in database, and then EMS is the subdirectory. I'll put the links to the samples in the blog post. There's also C++ versions. The sample that Jim showed that had an Angular client and an EMS backend, that's our notes package, demo package. That notes example is shipped with the product, not the Angular JS. Jim's going to put a link to the GitHub for the Angular JS client side. I don't know if you've done that yet, Jim, but Jim will put that.
I've not.
Yeah, he'll put that link in the blog post for the webinar, and I'll zip up our other demos that aren't ones that ship with the product and put those put those in Code Central and put a link in the blog post as well. Again, the short URL is in the chat window to the blog post for this webinar.
If you take a look at the DocWiki, the tutorials really do a good job of walking you through building it. And I find personally doing a tutorial it's much more informative to me than looking at a sample application.
And I have the links to the tutorials for building packages, reusable packages, as well as building clients. So those links are in the blog post right now. Let's see. There was a question, it was partially related to licensing and then how you spin up multiple instances for load balancing and so on. And Michael covered all of that at the end. I'm not sure if it fits specifically, but one of the comments or question was, what if you are on Amazon and you're starting up the Amazon load balancer and spinning up multiple instances of these package files, these ISAPI DLLs, and if you saw the licensing, there's no charge for running packages, right? The charge is related to how many users, either unlimited users or specific number of devices for single site. So single site, on multiple servers, for example, that was covered as well. So all of that is provided for when you purchase your license keys for deployment. Now, if you're still not sure, contact our sales office, contact our reselling partners in the country, wherever you are, and they will connect you as well with a field evangelist that will understand what your specific requirement is for your deployment, and guide you and build a quote for the number of licenses and the type of configuration that you need. So that's the best that I can say. You know, starting up multiple IIS instances of the package files still is only using a single application and a single user database, right? So, or you could go the other approach where you could have, say you only need to support 6 devices at a time or maximum. It doesn't matter how you scale up the back end if those 6 devices are beating on your RAD server implementation or deployment. So no matter how you ask the question, whether the instances of the package files or ISAPI DLLs are created on the spot when needed, go ahead, create as, spin them up. You're still either going to go back to a number of users, either unlimited or a number of devices, limited by how you grow the number of devices connected to your system and how hard they're working. So for security, we do authentication, and you can decide by groups how users or client applications can access your endpoints. And we support HTTPS. And on top of that, if you deploy an IIS, then you get all the IIS security that you can set in the IIS management console. So go for it. You could even, if you want to decide to encrypt and decrypt your JSON on both sides of a connection, even when you have all the rest of this security, you can do that as well. The user database, again, we're getting back to the user database is the interbase database. That's the license you're getting. So if you have an unlimited number of users, then that database can be placed somewhere, and it's only used for authenticating users and registering devices. The rest of the operations in your endpoints is going to be calling some other database or some other service or some other cloud-based system or whatever your business logic is. Those are the things you'll want to spin up. And then on the database side, meaning the application database side, that's going to be based on the number of users you have for an Oracle database or a SQL Server database or a Postgres database or an Interbase database or whatever. So the user database is how you have the number of licenses. So if you have, as Michael mentioned, if you have 2 different user databases for 2 different sets of users, you need 2 licenses, either for X number of devices or unlimited users running on separate user databases. All right. So maybe that'll make it simpler. The license on the sites is the user database, not the business database. I don't know how to differentiate it other than say the RAD server user database is what you're getting licenses for. That's an interbase encrypted database that you can place on a server. And the INI file, as you saw in several examples, you can point to where that the RAD server user database is placed. Okay? And if that doesn't answer it, send us an email and or contact our sales office. So if you're worried about failover, if you're worried about configurations and so on and replicating databases and such, talk to our offices and they will help you configure the bid that you need to satisfy the requirements of the system that you're implementing. Okay, I guess I could say it simply that way. as it relates to failover, single point of failure, and so on?
I would suspect, and again, talk to sales and they'll make sure you get it right, but there's probably is a way to make that work where it would be a single database, but it's replicated instead of
Correct.
being different data. There's a difference. One database that's replicated is not two databases. It's still one database.
Still one database, exactly. The multi-site is when, as Michael mentioned, you're going to have two completely different applications with two completely and or maybe overlapping sets of users that are going to be accessing different functionality as part of your solution. So, contact sales. I'm not sure about this one. Have pairs the same over multiple servers or have a queue system implemented connecting things like Redis? We don't do any queuing. That's what cloud systems and other load balancing type software do if it's related there. Jim, do you see that one at 12:31 p.m.? Capital REDIS?
I do see that one. So I'm not sure what point you wanted to connect to Redis or a queue system. There are components. If you want to deal with a queue system, you can totally do that. As far as having your packages implement that, but if you're wanting to use that for your user database, that I don't think that would work. But yeah, if you want to just have a package that, maybe it's a REST service that someone connects to and says, hey, is anything in the queue? Oh, it is. Okay, let's grab something out of the queue. You can do that. That's totally possible. There are components that do that. So yeah, the way you build the EMS packages is very flexible, and really anything you can find a library for Delphi or C++ Builder or an API that you can call, you can do that.
And as Jim mentioned, if he had created two virtual directories with two sets of the same or different EMS packages, each one of those would have an INI file, right, Jim? And inside of that INI file, it would point to wherever your RAD server user database is, or
right.
R. Okay.
So here is
Redis.io. Okay.
And here is a Delphi library for working with Redis.
Okay.
So all you got to do is use that library, build a module that talks to Redis, and you're off to the races, as they say.
Yep.
Works with Berlin and everything right there.
Excellent.
By Daniel Titi, one of our fantastic MVPs.
Out of Italy, bit time, absolutely.
He's got a new book coming out too, Delphi Cookbook. Volume 2 is coming out in the near future. So if you don't have Volume 1, get that now, and then when Volume 2 comes out, get that one.
And Sriram, who's a he's the program manager, the head of development for Interbase, just made a note that you can use Interbase's incremental dump or journaling activity features to have a standby database server to recover from any disaster. So there's
true.
Yep.
Yeah, there's lots of options there. So you're covered both from a technical point of view and from a licensing point of view, if I understand what your question correctly.
And if not, send us emails and also contact sales. I mean, this is all good fodder for additional things to cover on RAD Server in the coming months. So we'll take a look at what more we need to do. Maybe we'll create a scenario, Jim, where we put, have failover load balancing. Pawel, I know, is working on a bunch of things as it relates to Amazon and Azure and configuring and setting up and balancing and security and failover. So we'll take a look at what he creates. He's working on a white paper as well as some videos. So to go even deeper.
Excellent. Yeah, he does good work.
Okay, everyone. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Just saying, looking forward to that. So good, good to know.
Yeah, there's much more to come. We're going to cover RAD Server in all sorts of ways, including additional business domains and scenarios and so on in the future. So, yeah. So replication. There's information about about the journaling system and videos and articles, go to the Interbase Doc Wiki. And there's an Interbase Labs, which has a whole bunch of videos as well.